Hello and welcome to Ag News Today. Today we've got Steve Boyles with us and we're going to talk about temperament of cattle. So stay tuned, we'll be right back. Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about temperament of cattle, and Steve Boyles is here with us. Steve, you've got a great little presentation here about cattle that have a little attitude, I'll call it. So go ahead and let's go ahead and get her started.
All right, glad to do that. You can learn the science about raising cattle, but there's also that stewardship or livestock understanding of animal behavior, but it has an impact on animal performance. The disposition of cattle, are they wild, are they tame, can in fact their performance, their overall health as well, is impacted by that disposition. And it affects, we're going to talk more about the feed yard in this presentation, but it can affect how much money you make. Where did this disposition come from? Well, it can be genetic. Think about, in genetics, we talk about 0 to 1. A 0 means something is not related at all to genetics, whereas 1, it's a carbon copy. Well, the inheritability of disposition is about a 0.4 to 0.6. That's pretty high. For the cow-calf producers in the audience, one of the most important things in cow-calf is reproduction. Those reproductive traits are 0.2 to 0.3 inheritability. So they're hard. We continually select for it. Disposition 0.4 to 0.6. You can have an impact as a cow-calf producer in the disposition of the cattle. There are other factors involved as well. The environment, are the facilities that the cattle have to work through, are they in adequate design conditions so the cattle don't get aggravated? But also the handler. If every time the animals are handled, they're handled gently, moving at cattle speed, those animals are also going to be more likely to be tamed versus animals that are rushed and shouted at. You can make cattle wild that as well, so humans can have an impact. We're going to look at some research data out of 8 feed yards out of Iowa with over 13,000 head of cattle. The cattle were all treated the same way, even the diet was the same. And what they did was measure how these animals behaved in the squeeze chute. When they arrived at the feed yard, when midway through the feeding they were implanted again, and finally prior to when they went to the packing plant, how they behaved in that squeeze chute. This is the BIF disposition score. So if you wanted to score your animals, there is a chart out there with the Beef Improvement Federation. In general, if you look down through that, a 1 is a very, very tame animal. 5s and 6s, those are the ones you got to watch yourself with in a stressful situation. Now, the good news, this is those scores overall for the entire feeding period for those 13,000 head of cattle. Most cattle were in the 1s and 2s, relatively tame. And the 3s and 4s, a little restless, but not bad. The 5s and 6s is what we classify as aggressive. There was about, well, the numbers indicate 758 out of those, say, 13,000 head of cattle were scored with a 5 and 6.
Now these cattle here, Steve, as you see, the 5 and 6, how do they eat? Obviously, I would think that an aggressive cattle would be get out of the way, I want to eat, but that's maybe not the case, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people assume that.
Yeah.
Other people think, they're going to just be ready to eat.
Yeah,
as it
and
were.
they're just going to be bullies, I would think,
Yeah.
and push the other cows out of the way. But as you said, as we were talking earlier, that may not be the case, or you may you told me they might be sick to a degree or have something wrong.
Yeah,
So,
and that's what we think, and that's why maybe you might say that's why we do research.
Yeah.
These cattle, this is their arrival weight.
Yeah.
So it's before the feedlots had an impact, but the cow-calf producer may have seen this on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, the cattle arrived. The tamer cattle are heavier. About 630 pounds. The ones, the 3s and 4s, just 4 pounds lighter. But look at those 5s and 6s. That's 20 pounds off the tame cattle.
That's amazing.
That's weaning weight at the auction barn.
Yeah.
So the cow-calf producer, if they have mostly tame cattle, they're getting that price for 630 pounds. The wilder cattle, out of the same herd, it can be out of the same herd, that's a difference in price back to the cow-calf producer in disposition. And so that's what the feed yard, maybe they're bringing those cattle in at that lighter weight. Now it's kind of what you were just talking about. People look at that and say, you know what, at the feed yard, but they'll gain that weight back. They came in a little lighter in their working clothes and have compensatory gain.
Yeah. But that's not the case.
That
you're
is
saying.
not the case.
See, that just kind of amazes me that they would not gain back.
So. And this data, here's the overall average daily gain of these cattle
Still
through
low.
the entire feeding period. They didn't get it back. They didn't get it back.
No.
Their average daily gain never reflects that. So they had a reduced gain of around, like 2.9 plus versus the tame cattle over 3 pounds a day. So no, unfortunately, we didn't get any of the compensatory gain with those wilder cattle. The feed to gain, and this is just showing another example of that, just looking at things differently, is feed efficiency. The bars show the 1s and 2s, that's what we want to see. It's taken about 7.1 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of gain. Whereas the feed efficiency for the wilder cattle, 7.2, 7.4. That may seem small. That's not small. If you have, remember 13,000 head of cattle? That 10.1 pounds of feed for every pound of gain, that adds up. So feed efficiency is incredibly important, and those aggressive cattle were not as efficient. So that's another ding against cattle that have disposition problems. Well, that's the feedlot performance.
Yeah.
What do they do in the packing plant? Well, let's look at these bars. Let's spend most of our time on those bigger bars. The gold is USDA choice. Notice how we went from 70% choice down to below 60. As far as just quality grade. You go to the store and they talk about, we sell USDA choice beef. Well, those wilder cattle, not as many of them made choice. Also, correspondingly, you had an increased number of cattle that graded select among the wilder cattle. What does that mean? If you look at those charts, that the more marbling you have in general in the retail market is desirable versus that leaner one. Some people may want that less fat, but at a smaller portion of our population. And so from an economic standpoint, we don't get as much for that. And I know the little bars, the 4s, that's a small number. There's really not a place for those animals. The packing plant will dock you if the cattle grade standard, just based on our grids. So those are animals that don't necessarily make money.
Interesting.
This last slide is the final yes, no. Do we want to feed? Does the feed yard want to raise cattle that have disposition problems? Once again, this is all out of that same group of animals. Notice on the left, the docile cattle made over $50 a head. They made money.
Yep.
The restless cattle, a little bit less, but they made money. Does the feed yard want to even feed cattle that have a disposition problem? They lost money.
Right.
They wasted time with those animals. So from this standpoint, just animal behavior affects profitability. So cow-calf producers, that's where it starts. They need to do some disposition scoring of their animals. They are selling on to the next customer. It might be safer for them in working with wild cattle to maybe move those animals out of the herd and send them to the auction barn and certainly breed for weaning weight, milk production, but also include maybe in the back of their minds or on their records what is the behavior of those cows and what are they producing, because the feed yard is not getting a benefit from those wild cattle.
That's interesting. What does how does a feedlot work? I mean, when you bring cattle do they go to an auction barn and then an auction barn to the feedlot? How does cattle get to a feedlot? Yeah. And my question is, so if I've got, I'll say 50 head, and I'm going to sell them off, but maybe some of those are a little aggressive. How does that feedlot know that they're aggressive? Is there somebody going out and saying, I don't want that one, I want this one? Or you buy them as a lot, right? And then that feedlot goes, okay, yeah, just get these look aggravating, let's just move them off to the side. Is that what they're doing basically?
No.
No, they're not. Okay, so
well,
how does this?
It kind of revolves around to our audience that are cow-calf producers today. Hopefully you stayed on. It is really important for the cow-calf producer at this point to be involved, because they can remember the heritability of 0.4, 0.6. That is the cow-calf producer making some decisions. Now, I've been there before myself. Maybe one of my favorite cows, she's a little crazy, but boy, she brings in a nice calf. Well, it may look nice on your farm, but that animal, once it's weaned off the dam, goes into that feed yard, and that wildness is reflected there. There could be safety issues back on the farm for the cow-calf producer that when you're trying to help calve out some of those animals. For your own sake, it may be just safer to get rid of those animals that are aggressive and wild. But certainly the feed yard is not getting any benefit from those aggressive animals. So if you've ever sold cattle at the local auction barn and said, thank goodness that animal's gone, okay, think about that when you're making selection decisions. You don't want to just pass problems down the road. But yeah, I just want to point out, animal disposition is one of those points that we need to consider in animal selection.
Good sense, good sense. Well, Steve, thank you very much for joining us again. We'll be back again with another great topic from Steve. So until next time, we'll see everyone later.